judges ready? On the timer? On the negative team? Alright, let's jump right in. Observation 1, definitions. Definition 1, reinstitute. To institute, organize, or establish something again. Source, Collins English Dictionary. Definition 2, mandatory. Required by law or rule, compulsory. Source, Oxford Languages. Definition 3, military draft. Military draft is the enforcement by a government of its constitutional right to require all citizens of sufficient age and capacity to enter the military service of the country. Source, U.S. Legal. Observation 2, harms. Harm A, the current system is causing disunity. The current system is causing disunity. Quote, as a nation, we are split between those who serve in the military and those who have chosen to take other paths. Does that make one greater than the other? No. Yet even then, our country remains divided and disunified by the voluntary choice to serve America in the military or not. Quote, perhaps the greatest danger of the all-volunteer force lies in the slow but steady gulf that has been growing between the American people and those who protect them. The pool of those willing to serve is shrinking year by year, as at the same time the culture of America's military seems to be moving farther and farther away from those who serve. It is not that servicemen and women do not understand the civilian world, they find themselves bombarded by it every day. Source, Williamson Murray, 2017. Are there consequences for the all-volunteer military? Hoover-Duggar. Summary, a separation is appearing between military personnel and average U.S. citizens that has the potential to be detrimental to our country's oneness. This is dangerous to any nation, but particularly to one so grand as the United States. Harm B, the current system leaves us unprepared for war. Even though it may seem unlikely that America would be struck by any war in the near future, if we as a nation were to enter the war today, we would be far from prepared. In both World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and a number of America's greatest wars, the draft was instituted. And what did we do? Won those wars. Why? Because we had the means and manpower to fight efficiently and effectively. This piece of evidence says it best. Quote, the likelihood that the United States will have to fight a really big war, one that requires many thousands of troops with high levels of destructiveness and casualties, remains low, but the consequences would be enormous. And in a world threatened by increasingly threatened by disorder, violent extremism, and more aggressive large states, those low odds may be increasing. David Barno and Nora Ben-Sahel, Preparing for the Next Big War, 2016, War on the Rocks. Also from the same source comes another important point. Quote, what could trigger a big war? A massive direct attack on the United States certainly would, but lesser crises could also escalate unpredictably. Imagine, for example, a Russian invasion of another Eastern European state. An initial U.S. military response to one of these scenarios could escalate into a greater and potentially even global conflict. Source, David Barno and Nora Ben-Sahel, Preparing for the Next War, 2016, War on the Rocks. As the outside world grows more corrupt, the U.S. must be prepared for any war situation, whether that be defending another country or our own against an attack that could come at any moment. If we were to be thrust into war today, would we be prepared? Observation 3, the plan. Mandate, 18 to 24 months of service in the United States military for American males, naturalized male citizens, and male citizens. And male citizens after 6 months of residence in the United States. Agency. The agency responsible for implementing our plan will be the Selective Service. Funding. The Selective Service has already allotted a budget specifically for the purpose of conscription. Funding our military will be drawn from that. Funding for our military draft will be drawn from that. Additional funding is no concern. Enforcement. Our plan will be enforced by the Selective Service. Observation 4. Advantages. Advantage A. It benefits the American youth. Quote, compulsory service would allow all young people to pursue personal development before starting college or entering the workforce. 98% of students who took a gap year between high school and college reported that the deferment helped them develop as people, and 97% said it increased their maturity. Gap year students tend to have GPAs that are 0.1 to 0.4 higher than their peers. Source, procon.org, August 8, 2021. Mandatory national service, top 3 pros and cons. Today's American youth will be benefited by the responsibility of being part of our military. Advantage B, this will benefit the country overall. Quote, even though the idea of a military draft is scary, there are numerous activities that everyone performs that are in the public interest. Most of those activities require individual sacrifices to provide for the common good. Some examples of these civic duties include paying taxes, jury duty, and volunteering time at local public schools. A military draft is another one of those sacrifices, even though the government mandates it. By putting personal needs aside for a specific time, it is possible to gain life experiences and vocational knowledge. These advantages can help everyone start creating the personal success they want in life. Keith Miller, no date, the future of working. An extra force of military draftees would ensure a more national service, natural disaster recovery, and a number of necessary needs around the country we're struggling to supply today. Advantage C, a larger military would provide more backup units in battle. When a country institutes a military draft, then it is creating a series of personnel replacements that can immediately serve when needed. It provides a large number of highly trained reservists who can augment the fighting forces with their expertise. This advantage also allows for a quicker reinforcement during mobilization. Competitive mobilization is a determining factor when evaluating potential conflicts with other nations. It isn't the speed at which a minimal number of forces can reach a specific destination. It is how fast, trained, well-equipped forces can respond to dangerous situations. The Soviets eventually defeated Germany in World War II because they could keep sending in units as fast as others were getting destroyed. Source, Keith Miller, no date, the future of working. In any battle situation, the U.S. will be fully armed with reinforcements that any other army would lack. This ensures a more stable ground for success. To conclude, my partner, Presley Adam, and I, Sephora Turk, are for the resolution the United States should reinstitute a mandatory military draft because the current system is causing disunity, leaves us unprepared for war, and leaves us unprepared for war. Furthermore, reinstituting the draft would give American youth a sense of responsibility and would benefit the country overall. We urge the judges to see the matter in the same light as we do and vote in favor of our resolution, in favor of profitable change. Thank you for your consideration. I am now ready for cross-examination.
Do I just start?
You do what you're supposed to do.
Good morning.
Morning.
Are the judges ready? Is the timer ready? Affirmative. Can you please restate harm A?
That would be the current system is causing disunity.
And can you please restate the tag for harm B?
The current system leaves us unprepared for war.
Who is harm A's author?
Source?
Yes, source.
Williamson Murray, October. Yeah.
Can you please give me the credentials for Williamson Murray?
He's an American historian and a Yale graduate with honors in history, and he's an Air Force veteran.
Thank you. Can you please restate harm B's release date?
Harm B's what?
The date it was put out.
2016.
Thank you. Please restate your mandate.
18 to 24 months of service in the United States military for American males, naturalized male citizens, after 6 months of residence in the United States.
Only males, right?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Can you please restate your agency?
The agency responsible for implementing our plan will be the Selective Service.
Can you please restate Advantage A's tag?
Benefits American youth.
Can you please give the credentials for Keith Miller?
He has over 25 experience as a CEO and serial entrepreneur, and he has founded several multi-million-dollar companies. And as a writer, his work has been mentioned in CIO Magazine, Workable, BizTech, and the Charlotte Observer.
Thank you. Why are there no dates for Advantage B and C?
Because none were available.
So this could it have come out in like 1706?
There was no internet in 1706, so I highly doubt it.
Okay. Can you please give me the credentials for proton.org?
It's a nonpartisan website dedicated to showing both sides of every story.
Why do you believe that Proton is credible or shows both sides to every story?
Excuse me, I said bipartisan. It is nonpartisan, and that means that both sides are contributing, so it would be a credible source as there are many different sources feeding into it.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
What happened? Are you using prep time, Johnson?
Sorry?
Are you using?
No, prep time.
Okay.
All right, VP. Judges ready? Is the timer ready?
I am.
Affirmative team.
Yes.
Good morning. My partner, Sadie Smith, and I, Bronson Gutierrez, stand against the resolution. The United States should reinstitute the mandatory military draft. Quote, citizens should be practitioners of civic virtue for their country. They should be ever willing to fulfill the duties of citizenship. This includes compulsory duties like military service and the other actions they are to take if they are to preserve the principle of limited government through citizen self-reliance. Dallin H. Oaks. The affirmative team has given a speech showing you the advantages of having the draft and the disadvantages of not having one. In my speech, I shall show you why their case is a flawed one and why our counter plan deserves your ballot. Observation 1, definitions. We accept all the affirmative's definitions. In addition to these definitions, I would like to define one of our own definitions. Mandatory national service, as defined by Britannica.com, as required by rule or law, that citizens participate in military service or other actions for their country. This is Britannica.com. I will use mandatory national service in my speech. This is the counter plan we are proposing. Observation 2, harms. The affirmative team proposed 2 harms. They said that we are unprepared for war and that the current system causes disunity. They're completely right. We agree on this. However, they are flawed in saying that the draft is the answer. We say that a counter plan, mandatory national service, cures these harms and provides more advantages. They said that the current system causes disunity, and the draft is not the answer to this because, quote, Nixon's war policies divided the nation still further. However, in December 1969, the government instituted the first U.S. draft lottery since World War II, inciting a vast amount of controversy and causing many young Americans to flee to Canada to avoid conscription. Tensions ran higher than ever, spurred on by mass demonstrations and incidents of official violence, such as those at Kent State University, when troops shot into a group of protesters demonstrating against the U.S. invasion of Cambodia, killing 4 students. In mid-1971, the publication of the first Pentagon Papers, which revealed previously confidential details about the war's conduct, caused more and more Americans to question the accountability of the U.S. government and military establishments. This clearly shows that the draft is not the answer to curing our disunity. What does cure it is mandatory national service, and I'll show you it. Observation 3, the plan. The affirmative team proposed the draft, we proposed mandatory national service. The mandates that would need to be passed for a plan to be enacted are 1, do not institute the military draft and abolish the selective service system and replace it with the national service system. And pass the Universal National Service Act, which declares that it is the obligation of every U.S. citizen and every other person residing in the United States between the ages of 18 and 25 to perform a 2-year period of national service unless exempted, either through military service or through civilian service, and federal, state, or local government program, or with a community-based agency or entity engaged in meeting human, educational, environmental, or public safety needs. The agency that would pass our plan is the executive branch of the U.S. government. To enforce it, the National Service System. For funding, no additional funding is necessary. Contrary to their plan, they may have said that there would be no additional funding, but I'll show you evidence in a little bit showing you that this is not true. The advantages for our plan are advantage 1, follow in the footsteps of others who are thriving. Quote, ranked as the happiest country in the world, Switzerland is a wealthy, peaceful, and prosperous nation. Ranked consistently among the best countries to live in, especially because of its natural beauty, infrastructure, personal safety, and earning potential. It is no wonder that this gorgeous country is among the top choices for people who wish to live and work in Europe. Source, top 5 reasons why people choose Switzerland to live and work. EasyTrade.io 2019. Quote, Switzerland, which has 4 official languages and 3 major ethnic groups, bridges its divides with a mandatory national service program. The European nation is identified as one of the happiest countries in the world by the United Nations. Source, procon.org, procon.org, July 8, 2021. In summary, our country has many, many problems. Switzerland does not. This is because of its mandatory national service program. Other countries, such as Austria, also have a mandatory national service program, and they're doing just as well as Switzerland. Advantage 2, national service is cost-effective and saves money, and makes us money. Quote, national service programs are a proven cost-effective method to address critical needs in the country. A report from the Center for Benefit Cost Studies in Education found that youth national service programs in the United States cost a total of $1.7 billion annually, and returned a value of $6.5 billion, creating a social benefit 3.95 times more than the cost. For every $1 of taxpayer money spent on youth service programs, over $2 of savings resulted. If national service were mandatory, just as jury duty is required of everyone, the number of participants would grow and the resulting benefits would be exponentially greater. Source, procon.org, July 8, 2021. Summary, it's clear that if we could save money and with all the resulting benefits of mandatory national service, this would be a dream come true. Except it's not a dream, because if you enact our plan, it will become true. Advantage 3, satiate the affirmative's harms. The affirmative's plan would cure only one of the two harms that they brought up. Ours would cure both of them. Disadvantage 1 of their plan. Quote, moreover, conscription causes the military to spend more money on a less capable force. Overall, draftees are of lower quality since the AVF is selective and sets minimum standards. Conscripts serve shorter terms, creating costly turnover, rarely invest in military skills since they don't plan to stay, re-enlist as far lower numbers, making it tougher to build a NCO corps. The mandatory draft is expensive. Ours saves us money, theirs costs money. We would have to implement some kind of tax to pay for their plan, and they didn't mention any of that in their mandates. Disadvantage 2, if the draft is instated, there would be inequality. Quote, evidence shows that registration shapes society only when it is accompanied by a draft, though not always in ways that national leaders might hope. During the Cold War draft, men factored military service into their life choices by marrying, having children, going to college, or choosing professions that offered them legal deferments from the draft. That in turn introduced inequalities into the draft, undermining the legitimacy of the process. Men with means, especially white men, were significantly more likely to obtain a deferment than working class men, particularly men of color. Source: The Conversation, Max McGillis, June 7, 2021. Summary, again, introducing inequalities would further divide our nation, and this is another disadvantage of their plan. In conclusion, their plan costs money, ours makes us money. Their plan introduces inequalities, ours introduces equality. Their plan divides our nation, our plan unites our nation. Their plan has no benefits, our plan has benefits. And for these reasons, our plan deserves your ballot. Thank you for your time. I am now ready for cross-examination.
Cross-examination of 1 NC by 1. Morning.
Good morning.
Are the judges ready? In time? And the other half of the negative
Yes.
All right. Can you explain who the source for your exordium is?
Dalton Chokes. Dalton H. Oaks, a devout Christian, he is a graduate of Brigham Young University in 1954 and of the University of Chicago Law School in 1957. He practiced law and taught law in Chicago. He was a president of Brigham Young University from 1971 to 1980 and a justice of the Utah Supreme Court from 1980 until his resignation in 1984 to accept his calling to the apostleship.
All right. Do you believe that instituting mandatory national service would stop American youth from trying to avoid that, from trying to flee?
Because the problem with your plan is you're giving them one option. The benefit of national service is you have nearly unlimited potential. It could be anything from helping an elderly person cross the street and making that a program for that, or it could be anything from military service. So you're giving them such a wide array of options that no, they would not avoid it. They would do something that they wanted, which would give them benefits. They would do stuff that they wanted to do, that they would want to do.
So you give them options?
I would give them options, many, many, many options.
Don't list that in the beginning. You did not say that there would be optionality.
Military, I said it for the definition, military service and civilian service. I apologize for not defining civilian service, but civilian service has nearly unlimited potential for what you could count that as.
All right, do you have evidence for the costs, the high cost of implementing the draft, like you said?
I do. I did. I provided it for my disadvantage one.
Well, can you repeat that?
Moreover, conscription causes the military to spend more money on a less capable force. Overall, draftees are of lower quality since the AVF is selective and sets minimum standards. Conscripts serve shorter terms, creating costly turnovers, rarely invest in military skills since they don't plan to stay, re-enlist in far lower numbers, making it tougher to build a NCO corps, perform less well since they would prefer to be out rather than in, and must be returned even if disruptive since discharge would be a reward. Moreover, by treating people as a cheap...
Alright, that's enough. I have another question, thank you. But do you have evidence for the specific higher costs of the draft, the specific monetary costs?
I do have other evidence. My partner can bring that up in her speech.
Please do. Thank you. I have no other questions.
Would you like to take some prep time?
Yes, 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Okay.
So, what are all the stuff you said? No, I yeah. First
Observation 3.
I got
Advantage
it.
1, benefits for the youth. Advantage 2, benefits for the country. Advantage 3, bigger military.
Didn't say anything.
So for harm 1, this is divided for December.
So that's perfect, actually.
Third, so this one, but harm 2. Okay. Yeah. That's what I'm doing.
1 minute.
Okay.
So for that one, you can say yes.
And
Their curriculum. And that plan does recognize our plan is That's the first. So we're still saving time, we're not fighting. It's just saying, we agree with you. Our plan is that too. So this is just right now, we don't get to it.
30 seconds.
Benefits for you.
Benefits for you, so we're gonna say, you're basically gonna ignore all, you're gonna say, all of ours provide all this too. You're gonna continue. So you're gonna say our advantages, so you have one. You're gonna say, so read that one. Okay, so in addition to this, so they wanted the specific instances.
Oh, that would be time. Time to go to AC. Sorry. A little levity in the room.
Alright. Are the judges ready? Timer. Negative team? Yes. Good morning. Me and my partner, Sephora Turk, and I, Presley Adams, stand for the resolution that the U.S. should reinstate the mandatory military draft. So we'll start with observation 1, definitions. They've accepted all of our definitions. Thank you for that, and we accept their additional definition. Observation 2, harms. So the negative team argued that yes, disunity and war preparedness are a problem, but the military draft would not solve that problem. So for disunity, the military draft would solve this problem. Quote, put it simply, selective service is the only remaining thread in American society that ties all U.S. citizens to the military. It links the American people to the nation's wars and the risk of military service in those wars through the fundamental responsibility of defending the country when needed. It also continues to serve an overlooked but nonetheless important role in protecting American security. David Barno and Nora Ben Sahel, WarOnTheRocks.com, 2016. So essentially what this is saying is that the military draft is the only way the civilians and the American military can truly be connected with each other. If national service or not mandatory military draft would be the answer, it would not necessarily tie together civilians and the military in the way that the draft would. So harm 2, the selective service would also solve the problem of preparedness, although they argued against that because, quote, quote, second, and even more importantly, in this area of renewed great power competition, the United States may well find itself having to fight wars of greater size, scope, and casualties that require more troops than the nation can recruit voluntarily. A Russian invasion of the territory of a NATO ally like Estonia or Poland, a Chinese attack to subdue an unruly Taiwan, or even the need to replace thousands of U.S. casualties incurred in a new conflict with Iran or North Korea, all could easily exceed the capabilities with an all-volunteer force, even after the resolves had been fully mobilized. If a second clash erupted in the middle of one of these conflicts, it would place an impossible set and lethal global demands on an already stretched force. We cannot simply assume that a surge of patriotism would suddenly energize the youth of America to volunteer en masse to serve in future, bigger, and more lethal wars, even in the aftermath of a direct attack on the United States. David Barno and Nora Ben-Sahel, Preparing for the Next Big War, 2016, WarOnTheRocks.com. So what this is saying is that there is not enough people willing to fight voluntarily to really support a war of the size that other world countries are capable of. Also, hang on. Another quote that supports this is, quote, a draft for the 21st century would be based on several principles. Only males would be drafted, as service in combat arms would be a high likelihood. Women, of course, could enlist as they do now. The term of active duty would be short, say 18 months. There would be a follow-on assignment to a reserve component for 2 years. With conscription, moreover, it is likely that enlistments in the reserves would increase markedly, thus ending another recruiting shortfall. Very important, options for alternative civilian service would be generous in a reconstituted conscription system, thereby fully respecting conscience objectors' rights to serve in the armed forces. So, meanwhile, even though this selective service would be in play, national service would still be an option, because when America does not have a war, we don't necessarily need all these troops, but when war does happen, we at least have most of America's young men drafted for that. Also, me and my partner would like to introduce the third harm. The current system fails to represent our country as a whole. So, quote, further than that 1% does not come primarily or even secondarily to the families of the Ivy Leagues of Wall Street, of corporate leadership, from the Congress, or from affluent America. It comes from less well-to-do areas: West Virginia, Maine, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and elsewhere. For example, the Army now gets more soldiers from the state of Alabama, population 4.8 million, than it gets from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles combined. Aggregate metropolitan population more than 25 million. Similarly, 40% of the Army comes from the 7 states of the Old South. As one of us has documented in his book, Skin in the Game, Poor Kids and Patriots, this is an ethically poisonous situation. And as the article in The Economist concludes, it is dangerous as well. Source, Dennis Leitch, The American Conservative, 2017. Observation 3, plan. The negative team argued mostly that funding would not be a decrease in money, it would be an increase. But the affirmative team would like to argue against that. Quote, thus with an all-volunteer force, there will be considerable savings in training costs as a result of learner turnover rates. With a 2-year tour of duty involving 6 months of basic training and a couple months for processing discharge, the military actually receives very little benefit from the draftees who do not re-enlist. So basically what this is saying is that the more volunteers we have, the less the cost will be, because the training is not necessarily necessary. Finally, advantages. The negative team argued that Switzerland was considered one of the most peaceful countries on earth, and basically just defines their military system right now. But also Norway is one of the most peaceful countries according to their same source. Quote, Norway was the first NATO country to expand conscription to include women. It was also one of the first countries in the world to allow transgender people to serve, changing its policy in 1973. The country's conscription is selective, so therefore, source Caitlin Foster, 2019. So therefore, the more countries have become draft countries, the more peaceful they become. Lastly, inequality. They argued that the draft causes inequality with draftees due to some jobs. So we would like to argue against that. Quote, military population that has disproportionate number of young people with a history of sexual abuse. One theory for this holds that military service is an easy way for young people to get out of their home, and so the military will disproportionately draw recruits from troubled families. According to a 2014 study in the American Medical Association's JAMA Psychiatry, men with military service are now twice as likely to report sexual assault during their childhood as men who never served. Source Sebastian Junger, 2016. So what this is saying is that the military could serve as an excuse to some abused young adults, and so implementing the draft would prevent that from happening because anyone's going to get drafted anyway. In conclusion, my partner and I stand for the resolution that the U.S. should implement the military draft. I'm ready for cross-examination.
Good morning. Okay. Are the judges ready?
Yeah.
Is the time right?
Yes.
Affirmative. Okay. Is the mandatory military draft that you're proposing, is it only for men?
To be necessarily drafted, yes, but women are still allowed to
So would the advantages of the draft only apply to the men?
not necessarily,
How so?
because women would still be part of the military. They just wouldn't necessarily be in the draft because women have a lot.
But the woman is for the volunteer force.
Mhm.
So would those advantages still apply to the woman?
Certainly that's good.
Okay. How much money is allotted to the selective service system?
I'm not sure. Let me look. I don't know.
Okay. If you find that, please tell us because I'm very sure that you will have to apply a tax if you do not know the number. The amount of money is given to the selective service system. When was the last time Norway went to war?
I don't know.
Okay, and
Probably not recently because they're one of the most peaceful countries on earth due to their
so can you compare the United States, which has been at war its entire lifetime, besides 21 years, to Norway, which is always peaceful?
Not necessarily because they have two very different militaries.
And you said that with the draft, the more peaceful you will become, correct?
Not necessarily.
The-
I did say that
Okay.
actually.
Russia has the draft, doesn't it?
I don't think so.
They have the draft. They invaded Ukraine, right? They invaded Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And China has the draft too, right?
I don't know.
They have the
Don't
draft. So,
So?
so these two countries, which are almost constantly at war, have the draft. And do you really think that the United States, which is the world power, the police force of the world, do you really think that they should have the draft?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is more effective, national service or the military draft?
Probably the military draft.
And how so?
Because people are required to serve so that more people are also required to perform national service if there's not a war, but if there is a war, then we're prepared.
So you are going outside of the resolution by saying that national service in peacetime, but to draft during times of war. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying the draft will be implemented at all times, but when there's not a war, those people drafted will be put to military service mandatorily.
Okay. Okay, but if the draft is only for men, and the national service is for women and men, and the advantages are that much greater, isn't national service more effective?
I never said the national service was for women.
No, I'm talking about our plan. Mandatory national service.
Can you repeat the question?
Mandatory national service isn't that more effective because it applies to men and women, and it has that many more benefits than the draft, which applies to only men.
I don't really understand the question.
Okay. No further
Fine.
questions? Thank you for your time. Yeah, sure. 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
No.
Oh my gosh.
This.
What do you want me to say?
What was that? I should have asked for nurse. What was that? So we're gonna say that issue.
Let me just say
Well, you could say, I'm sorry. You could say they're right. You could say, yeah, they're right. There's draft, and now let's make sure that national service is and men from all the states.
I think her
So right. That's what I would say. Because the more you disagree, the more you have to talk.
I mean, she was
Right?
like, calm and cool and
I need to
sometimes.
oh, there we go.
But he's more pleasant, like this thing. 1 minute.
It's like, what's the limit? Like, I just.
Okay, so,
Always, 30 seconds.
might consider taking out.
No, but they were talking, so obviously.
Okay, just don't do a conclusion. Just
Wait,
talk
where do you
until
want me
it's
to say
done.
this?
Right here.
10 seconds. After this, we're having that break before our rebuttals. After the cross opinion. Alright, time.
Are the judges ready? Is the timer ready? Affirmative team. Quote, the public service is a program along these lines that could provide are virtually limitless. They could include tutoring and mentoring, participating in after-school enrichment programs, improving environmental conservation, building public housing, organizing youth networks, providing real-time information during natural disasters, assisting small businesses through outreach to young consumers, and helping in the construction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of public parks and facilities. End quote, David L. Carden. We've had a speech showing why the draft is a bad idea and why our plan, mandatory national service, is an excellent idea. The negative team stands against the resolution. The United States should reinstitute the mandatory military draft. The affirmative team had harm one. They said it causes disunity. Affirmative team says without the draft they're saying without the draft our country is divided. However, the draft is not the answer. The draft actually divides our country further than it already is. Quote, the draft was another major source of resentment among college students. The counterculture movement divided the country. To some Americans, these attributes reflected American ideals of free speech, equality, world peace, and the pursuit of happiness. To others, the counterculture movement reflected a self-indulgent, pointlessly rebellious, unpatriotic, and destructive assault on America's traditional moral order. A counterculture developed in the United States in the late 1960s. This movement lasted from approximately 1964 to 1972. It coincided with America's involvement in Vietnam. A counterculture is the rejection of conventional social norms. Source Flexbook, August 14, 2019. Another harm they brought up was that we are unprepared for war. They are completely right, and their plan does cure that we would be more prepared for war, but so does ours, as shown in my partner's previous speech. Our plan mandates abolish national service system, replace it with the national
abolish the selective service system, replace it with the national service system, pass the Universal National Service Act, which declares that it's obligation of every U.S. citizen and every other person residing in the United States between the ages of 18 and 25 to perform a 2-year period of national service, unless exempted either through military service or through civilian service in a federal, state, or local government program with a community-based agency or engaged in meeting human, educational, or environmental, or public safety needs. The agency that would pass our plan would be the executive branch of the U.S. government. Enforcement for our plan would be the National Service System, executive branch of the U.S. government. For funding, no additional funding would be necessary. It would be, in fact, the cost would be offset, so the government will be making money. Also, the affirmative team brought up harm 3, the current system fails to represent us as a whole, which basically they said that more people come from Alabama than New York. But they're completely right. I'm sure more people come from Alabama than New York, but the national service would make all people from all states do it, and it would just, both of them would fix it, so that really didn't matter. Anyway, advantages that they said would benefits for youth. National service has many benefits for youth, and they have much more options if you don't want to go kill some people. And you could start even at a younger age if you're really into it. It benefits our country even more. They said it would benefit our country. National service would benefit our country even more than just the soldiers in the army, because they could help everything like the homeless people or bridges that collapse, and etc. They also said it would be a bigger military. It does give us a larger military, but it would compromise our army. Quote, in general, forcing people into things they do not like and want has never been a good idea in the history of mankind. We all become good at things we really like since we want to do those things all the time and get plenty of expenses during that. In turn, we will often be quite bad at things we don't like since we lack motivation to carry out those tasks. The same concept can be applied to mandatory military services. If we force people into military service, people who don't like this kind of work will not be motivated at all, and will also not be willing to learn and to use their time in an efficient manner. Source ENC, August 5th, 2021. Moving on to our advantages. Advantage 1, Switzerland is a novel example of national service. Quote, Switzerland actually has one of the lowest crime rates in all of the industrial countries. In 2018, Switzerland ranked first for the 8th consecutive year as the most innovative country in the world, by the Global Innovation Index. Only Switzerland and Sweden have remained in the top 3 of the innovation ranking for more than a decade. Source, study in Switzerland, Defina Zimri, August 30th, 2020. Summary, Switzerland's place of wonders, and while it's not perfect, it's generally regarded as the best country on our planet. And if America could become more like Switzerland by adapting mandatory national service, the Swiss ideology of unity is rooted in their national service, and that unity bleeds into other aspects of the nation. Thus, mandatory national service helps the country become a better place. Advantage 2, it would be cost effective and make us money. Rather than costing taxpayers money, national service saves federal dollars. Studies have shown that national service programs generate a 2-to-1 return for the taxpayer and either a 4-to-1 return for society in terms of higher earning and increased output. Source, Chicago Tribune, March 27, 2017. National service will save us money, plain and simple. Instead of costing us a bunch of money, national service would give back to our country as a whole. Here are some disadvantages of the plan. Disadvantage 1, the draft cost money. My partner asked me to bring up conscription. Quote, conscription remains an awful idea. None of the arguments survive scrutiny. For instance, contra the presumption of a military draft is not cheap. A system of national compulsion will require bureaucracy and enforcement. Young people would engage in a variety of costly and inefficient draft avoidance activities. The opportunity cost of wasting their labor would also be high. That is the expense of denying society whatever draftees otherwise would be doing. Working in a productive job, finishing an education, using skills and talents to benefit to the benefits of others. The result would be a serious waste of valuable talent and potential in the world's quote, end quote, in the world's most militarized power. 2021 Cato Institute. Given the domestic and international challenges ahead, the American people will collaborate to build a safe, prosperous, and sustainable future. The current partisan divides threatens to make a collective action difficult. It is time for the United States to create mandatory national service program to help Americans build the future they want together. Thank you for your time. I am now ready for cross-examination.
please repeat the advantage, second advantage,
Of ours or of yours?
of yours?
Cost effective and makes us money.
No, that is, so advantage 2 of ours.
Advantage to yours. Yeah. Benefits the country.
Yes. Can you repeat that?
I just said it benefits the country more than the soldier. It benefits our plan benefits the country more than just yours because yours is just for the army, but ours is for all different little flaws in our country.
Okay. Can you read evidence for advantage A?
Benefits for youth.
Yes.
We didn't have them. We agreed with you.
Okay. Can you read evidence for advantage B?
Is that the one I just said?
No, you said A.
No, the one before that. Benefits country.
Yeah. What's the evidence?
We're
for that?
agreeing with you. We agree with you that national service and mandatory service will do the same thing.
Okay.
So we didn't have evidence for that.
What are the credentials for ENC?
One second. Aims to provide high quality content that is helpful to the reader. Among others, articles have been cited on Wikipedia, Medium.com, as well as several college websites.
Okay. What would be the point of a mandatory national service if the U.S. were to go to war?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
What would be the point of mandatory national service if the U.S. were to go to war?
It wouldn't help the war. It would just keep people who don't want to be in the actual military because they would just be helping in another form.
Okay. If people only volunteered if they liked it, what would our military look like?
The same, because people only volunteer if they want to be in the army.
Would you agree that we have a weak military right now?
No.
Then why are you advocating to change how our military and national service works?
I'm just counterplanning your plan to change what we already have, which is already fine.
Okay. What evidence do you have for harm B?
Unprepared for war?
Yes.
We agreed with you, we just said both of ours would do the same thing, would
Okay.
affect it the same way.
Can you please repeat the source of disadvantage 1?
Draft costs, the conscription thing?
Mhm.
Cato Institute?
Are there credentials for that?
Yes. Cato Institute. For more than 40 years, Cato has led the charge for liberty in our nation and around the world. The Cato Institute is a public policy research organization or think tank that creates a presence for and promotes libertarian stuff.
Okay,
No further questions.
3 minutes before the negative rebuttal in R.
Okay. I think so. So what am I doing?
You're gonna have
Did I cover everything? Yeah, but like, what do I do? Do I decide?
And it looks like you each have 3 minutes left on prep time in addition,
Plus the 2 minutes, right?
plus right now. Yeah.
No, plus 2 minutes for the rebuttals.
Yeah, that's what she said.
That's what's happening right now.
Oh.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we can just go through these. We say
and then you have the army start to be done.
this
And then say you have
came down to
Is it too early for
which
chocolate?
which provides you more advantages,
Um,
which plan provides more disadvantages. You know,
I can do this to you. I can only use
It's so much in my brain, I know.
I'm gonna do some of this.
The judging seems so hard, it's like writing that like, double tap, you didn't answer what I said.
you know, since everyone was
When
serving,
we go back to the.
then we would put out, more factories would go faster, or people would be better.
Thank you for the chocolate.
Would be more uniform,
That's
more
my
people
favorite.
would volunteer.
Delicious.
Hannah works at a different
What do
HEB
you
than
want? Or are we not getting there?
I
No.
it's
Oh, we
usually
can
good
start
too,
writing
so
this.
it takes
You're
me
basically
forever.
the same thing.
Shopping at HEB. She's a checker. Oh, she's
So basically,
You're the one who's
You're not supposed to do any rebuttals at all.
She's like,
I mean,
Can't bring in
everything's
a
gone exactly how as I planned.
One lady did what?
anyways,
Go through here and start planning. What we're wanting is,
Mediocre.
And then 40-year-old man on the same day.
Up there, 2 minutes.
Like they ask for a pen, so she gives
They're
it to him, and then
cross-examination.
they hand her a piece of paper. And she's like,
It's like no evidence.
I mean, she's had some crazy stories. I mean, she has some crazy stories.
Like in that tournament, the thing that,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking about Lisa,
So,
right, because.
it's fine. So
Yeah, well, she has
start
some of
organizing.
this too, but
What do you
she's like, when they
They're
talk,
gonna
come talk to you,
just look for the biggest ones.
and they don't have a
They're-
mask on,
they're sucks, I know.
but then you walk up, so you try to hear them.
Okay.
That's what
And she's like,
so they're bugs.
keep 6 feet
Personal
apart.
attack.
Division.
Okay.
You're not supposed to be listening.
Like, I mean,
You're talking
it's
loudly enough.
That's a really interesting.
I'm not trying to listen.
She likes the freedom of bagging and walking outside and being able to see something that needs to be done and do it.
Oh, we
And
don't really
like
have
checking,
it.
you're like stuck. Yeah, and they put her
It's
express,
kind of like that.
which is fine, cause there's not that much, but you have to be your own bagger. 30 seconds.
2 AR comes up.
So,
Okay, I need to see it.
anyways.
Is there cross-examination in the book?
No, there's not. It seemed like you could-
I have no idea what's going on. Okay.
Well, anything that says there's cosmos. Great, what is it? Where's my money sign?
Alright, one in R.
Oh, my dad. Take his credentials. Watch it. Sailing.
Yeah, I don't feel like anybody's gonna, because I did all.
Money. Are the judges ready? Is the timer ready? Members of the team? Good morning. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Judges, this debate has come down to the point of whose plan is better. Their plan is the draft, ours is mandatory national service. Their plan has several disadvantages, our plan has several benefits, and they have provided no disadvantages for our plan, despite having 2 speeches. Point 1, the draft is harmful. The draft is divisive and unhelpful. This point matters because instituting something that helps no one and is in fact counterproductive and causing division in our country and costing a lot of money will drain our nation emotionally, physically, and mentally, and financially. Quote, in the 1860s, mobs of mostly foreign-born white workers took to the streets in New York City to protest conscription during the Civil War, burning down buildings and inciting violent attacks against black residents. A century later, burning draft cards became a symbol of protest against the war in Vietnam. Quote, I think it's fair to say that the draft has never been wildly popular, Dr. Mittalsdott said. Source, New York Times, Sarah Mervosh, 2020. Summary, as the draft is wildly unpopular and counterproductive in inciting unity, the draft will harm our nation. Ours, mandatory national service, will not. The draft is unequal. Quote, evidence shows that registration shapes society only when it is accompanied by the draft. Though not always, wait, I already recorded that, never mind. Sorry, apologies. Quote, and some opposed to a system of deferments which led to disproportionately working class force in Vietnam. As many as 3/4 of those who served in Vietnam were from either working or lower class families, end quote. Source, vvmf.com, 2022. What this says is that inequalities would further divide our nation, and that is not good. That's another disadvantage of their harm. For our plan, quote, it solves public challenges at low cost to taxpayers, with some programs, such as FEMA Corps, saving taxpayers millions of dollars. A review of 139 studies of national service found overwhelmingly positive results, with the benefits outweighing costs to taxpayers by more than 2 to 1. Here's a cost-effective national service proposal, 2020, Brookings, Isabel v. Sahel. A review of 139 studies around the globe is a lot of studies. All these studies are extremely credible, and they show how our plan is better than the military draft. Another one, quote, a cost-benefit analysis of AmeriCorps programs found that for each dollar spent, taxpayers receive a return of more than $2 in the form of increased tax revenues and productivity. The social benefits, such as increased human and social capital, are even greater, with a return of more than 3.5 times the cost. National service can connect young people to opportunity and community, 2020, Brookings, Martha Ross. Their plan costs money, ours makes money. We provided Switzerland in our past two speeches, and another country that has mandatory national service is Austria. Quote, however, the fact that the young men are developing certain abilities by means of civilian alternative service is not only important for themselves. The society as a whole benefits from the increased competencies in the social and health sectors and a better understanding for less favored groups, because the young men frequently continue with their activities at their emergency response organizations even after their civilian alternative service. All regions in Austria depend on civilian alternative service. Every town and every village needs persons doing civilian alternative service. Source, Federal Ministry of Public of Austria, 2022, civilian alternative service in Austria. We brought up Switzerland, and now we brought up Austria, showing that mandatory national service is a proven method. It works time and time again, and it will work in America. Their plan costs money, ours makes money. Their plan weakens us, our plan strengthens us. Their plan divides us, our plan unites us. Their plan makes us more like our enemies, Russia and China. Our plan makes us more like Switzerland or Austria. Every country has problems, and America has a lot. We ask that national service be implemented, lest we fall further apart and destroy ourselves. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, nations do not die from invasion, they die from internal rottenness. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Quick?
2 minutes, please.
Yes.
Well, I was saying, for people who don't know, we're not taking military, you still need to serve the
Just make sure to say that, because if you say that, then if you say it without this on here,
I was looking at yours.
you can see it. Good idea.
I will be a little bit more.
They are new.
Alright, I need more stuff, so let's just take this.
I've done this.
1:30.
Okay, so. Okay, so for Austria. Austria, say Austria has mandatory national service. Make sure you say that voice or not. Okay, okay, and. Should we bring in? You can bring in this one too. Oh, make sure you're organized. To my papers in there.
You're like me last. I know how it feels.
Because I was trying to read it and realize I already said it.
I was like, you just.
1 minute. Oh, 30 seconds. Sorry. Can't read. Two AR.
Sure. You can use this too.
Okay. The judge is ready? And the timer.
Yes, I am.
The negative team. Alright, the negative team has attempted to say that our plan is going to further divide our country. However, our plan has And I want to repeat this piece of evidence. It says that a draft for the 21st century would be based on several principles. Only males would be drafted, as service in combat arms would be a high likelihood. Women, of course, could enlist as they do now. The term of active duty would be short, say 18 months. There would be a follow-on assignment to a reserve component for 2 years. Very important, options for alternate civilian service would be generous in a reconstituted conscription system, thereby fully respecting conscientious objectors' rights not to serve in armed forces. And that was Charles Moscow's. They are arguing for national service, and we're arguing for mandatory military service. Our mandatory military service includes national service. So when they say that mandatory service is dividing our country, in truth, it would not, because it would be doing virtually the same thing as national service alone. Quote, fewer and fewer communities are bearing the burden of sending loved ones to war. One consequence of the end of conscription is the ability to have very few Americans impacted by or connected to service, and a society that struggles to understand and interact with those who do. Less than 1% of Americans serve on active duty at the time, and the veteran population comprises less than 10% of the population. The best ambassadors for military service are those who have served themselves, so it should come as no surprise that the armed forces have become increasingly insular. That was Amy Schaefer. They are right. National service has many benefits, it is wide and it is varied, and people could choose what they want to do. We are adding national service to our mandatory military service. It's included. All the benefits they say come from national service, they come from our plan as well. Another thing they're saying is they're praising the benefits of national service in other countries. And I would like to point out that, quote, in Canada and Britain, close to 10% of combat soldiers are diagnosed with PTSD. In Israel, a country in which military service is mandatory, the rates are roughly 1%. Among American troops, the rates are as high as 25%. This is especially remarkable in light of the fact that only 10% experience combat. Sean Illing, Is Civilization Good for Us, October 27th, 2016. What this is saying is in Israel, a country with mandatory military service, the PTSD rates are so much lower than in the United States, a country with voluntary military service. And the last thing I want to go over is the cost. They're saying that the mandatory military draft is going to cost us a lot more. I still have not heard specific monetary values that will tell me that it is indeed going to cost us more. The selective service is allotted a budget of $27.6 million. That is what they asked us to bring up, and I have done that. That our funding for the military draft will come from that. So we don't need to increase taxes or anything that they assume that we would. Quote, fiscally, the all-volunteer force is going to break the bank. The land forces in particular are still having difficulties fielding adequate numbers, even with lowered standards substituting women for men from 1.6% of the AVF in 1973 to more than 16% today. Recruitment and re-enlistment bonuses totaling tens of millions of dollars, advertising campaigns costing billions, massive recruitment of non-citizens, use of psychotropic drugs to recycle unfit soldiers and Marines to combat zones, and overall pay and allowances that include free world-class healthcare and excellent retirement plans that are, for the first time in the military's history, comparable to or even exceeding civilian rates and offerings. Dennis Lake and Lawrence B. Wilkerson. The Deep Unfairness of America's All-Volunteer Force, October 16, 2017. This is saying that with the all-volunteer force, we are high in cost. With the mandatory military draft, these costs will not be the same. Thank you. That is all I have.
Yeah, whatever we have left.
Everything we have left.
Okay, 8 minutes.
How many?
3.
3. Yeah. So I'm gonna do.
Oh, and your third one.
Do whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I have. So good.
So I have some exhibition and
Go back to Oshkosh. And I'm doing.
oh, really cool. This is
30 seconds. Time.
Yeah.
We're campaigning.
Yes.
Are the judges ready? Is the timer ready? Affirmative team. So basically, the negative team is trying to convince y'all to do mandatory national service instead of mandatory military service. And some reasons for this is, first, the draft is quite unpopular. In the national service would come across quite better because it is not as hardcore work and you're not slaving away at workouts or preparing to cover a bomb for your teammate or whatever. And the draft is quite unpopular, as shown, quote, according to global researchers, over 570,000 men were classified as draft offenders by the department during the 1960s when the Vietnam War became increasingly unpopular. That's the entire population of Wyoming. Source: the infographic show, David Barno, 2019. Another piece of evidence is only 29% of recently surveyed people say the United States should have a military draft war on the rocks. Another reason is recruiting isn't easy for the military. Quote, at least 70% of Americans between 17 and 24 are ineligible for military service due to obesity, mental health issues, past drug use, criminal records, or lack of high school degree. Overall, only 13 of young adults express a positive propensity to serve, with women about half as likely as men to consider enlisting. The Defense Department estimates that just 2% out of 20.6 million have the desired combination of strong academic credentials, adequate physical fitness, and an interest in serving. Quote, Bloomberg editorial. Recruiting isn't easy. For the people who don't meet the requirements, which is the majority of America, that they don't meet up for the military, they could still serve by being a mandatory national service, which has a spot for everyone, and you don't have to be a perfect human being with super athletic build to help serve your country. Third thing is Australia has mandatory national service, is one of the top 10 places to live in the world because of their service program. Quote, Austria is the country with one of the best qualities of life in the world, with its capital Vienna rated consistently in the top 10 of Mercer's most livable cities in the past decade. Nomad capitalist. Yeah, and it is unequal. The draft is unequal. For citizens in higher statures, they can easily get out of the military draft, leaving the lower class to sacrifice their lives and time, leaving their families at home. Quote, in addition, privileged citizens have far more opportunities to escape conscription, though such as through higher education or immigration, and drafted citizens within armies may also be arranged in a hierarchical manner. Source: Classroom, Rebecca Richards. I would also like to point out that in the affirmative team's plan, they said mandatory service. They originally said military service, and now in the AR, they randomly just said that they were adding national service to their military service, which means they agree with our counter plan, and it goes against their mandate. They also brought up expenses for us, and I would like to turn it back onto them. They never explained how much money is allotted to the selective service system. So even ours, we already brought up evidence that ours is cheap, but they have not said how expensive or how much money is allotted to the selective service system to make their plan happen. Thanks for your time.
Do you have the last minute?
Yeah.
I am not going to say that. What the heck? I'm not gonna say it.
You should just you should.
argued against many of our points, and so as the final speech, I'm just going to kind of re-implement everything we argued for in the 1AC. So the 2NR started off with arguing that mandatory national service is better than the mandatory selective service for the reason that it is unpopular. And so I have evidence against this. The military draft, yes, it could be viewed as unpopular, but this quote states that, quote, "Today, when asked how likely somebody is that they will be serving in the military in the next few years, 87% of American citizens responded, definitely not or probably not. While the American public has faith in the efficiency of our military, they feel little to no personal connection with it." So this could also advocate for the fact that the current system is causing disunity, because there are so little people serving in the military that the gap is widening between the military servers and the civilians. And also the 2NR argued that we randomly brought up the topic of national service in our last speech. I would like to argue against that on our 1AC Advantage B. It is benefit the country overall, and I will repeat the quote. "Even though the idea of a military draft is scary, there are numerous activities that everyone performs that are in the public interest. Most of these activities require individual sacrifices to provide for the common good. Some examples of these civic duties include paying taxes, jury duty, and volunteering at time at local public schools. The military draft is just another one of those sacrifices." So I'm just going to pause there. It's not the end of the quote, but basically, through national service, military could be considered part of the national service. Continuing the quote. "Even though the government mandates it," oh, that was a bad place to stop. "By putting personal needs aside for a specific time, usually 2 to 4 years with the current structure, it is possible to gain life experience and vocational knowledge. These advantages can help everyone start creating personal success they want in life." Keith Miller, The Future Working. Also, we also did bring up the same harm or advantage basically in the 2AC. I have the evidence for that somewhere. Also, they argued that the military draft is unequal due to certain draft regulations. And so I am going to repeat this quote. We have already repeated twice. I'm sorry, that's the wrong quote. I'm going to say a quote that we have not said yet. Quote, "Yet the potential benefits of exposing more young Americans to the rigors of military service are undeniable. At basic training, drill instructors begin by taking smartphones away from recruits and mailing them home to their parents. Together with other tough discipline, these workers wonder. Perhaps for the first time in years, recruits pick up their chins, look someone in the eye, and speak clearly, rather than mumbling into the palm of their hand. All this is good for young people, and employers increasingly recognize that the value of military training. Veterans are known to make excellent employees because of their discipline, reliability, leadership, and good conduct." Quote, Ash Carter, 2019, Dallas Morning News. So essentially, they were arguing that the military would just ensure that more young Americans were basically tortured till they were fit enough to actually qualify for the military. This is just implementing basic training that would essentially prepare them for if there was a war. But when a war is not going on, they would be put to national service with which they are already arguing for. Okay, and they also said that we did not mention a selective service budget. We did. It is $27.6 million, which is much less than the current military is implying now. And so in conclusion, my partner and I, Sephora Turk, that sounded weird. My partner Sephora Turk and I, Presley Adam, argue for the resolution that the U.S. should re-implement the military draft. So be sure to vote for us, and that's all I have to say. Good job.
Good job, guys. It cheers you up.
Good job. So it's like,
Good job.